Hi, this is Julie with an invitation for you before we begin. In this episode with Rabbi Sharon Brous, we talk about the importance of turning toward one another during difficult times. Several weeks ago, our conversation inspired me to create a weekly online gathering where for 1 power hour, we could connect to ourselves and one another, to activism we could do together on the call, and to planting seeds for our rest and renewal over the weekend. There is so much to freak out about right now. But if this calls to you, I hope you'll pause the doom scrolling and join us for what we're calling Don't Freak Out Friday. Follow the link in the show notes or at Mother's Quest Pod on Instagram to register and come along. Now, on to the show.
The answer to your question is the most powerful ancient wisdom that I had inherited as a student of Torah guided me toward this understanding that we are ultimately called to turn to one another with compassion and curiosity, precisely at the moments that we feel most inclined to pull away from each other.
At a time when so many of us feel brokenhearted by the ongoing pain, uncertainty, and polarization in our world, Rabbi Sharon Brous has been a grounding force and a guiding light for me and so many. She's the senior rabbi and founder of IKAR, a leading-edge Jewish community based in Los Angeles, known for weaving together soulful spirituality, social justice, and deep belonging. A graduate of Columbia University for both her undergraduate and then her MA in human rights, and ordained by the Jewish Theological Seminary, she is widely recognized as one of the most influential rabbis in America. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, and the Washington Post, and her 2016 TED Talk, Reclaiming Religion, has been viewed by more than 1.5 million people. Most recently, she's made an impact with her book, The Amen Effect, Ancient Wisdom to Mend Our Broken Hearts and World, which offers a powerful roadmap for healing through presence, connection, and care. I first learned about Rabbi Brous from my podcast guest, Valerie Kaur, author of See No Stranger, whose revolutionary love project is deeply aligned with Rabbi Brous's message of compassion and collective responsibility. Since then, I've turned again and again to Rabbi Brous's sermons, words that name difficult truths and pathways forward with honesty, courage, and humanity. Often, it felt as though her messages came just before the headlines, as if she were speaking directly into the emotional moment that was about to unfold. When I reached out to see if she would be open to a conversation, I was surprised and deeply grateful when she said yes. Then, while reading The Amen Effect in preparation for our conversation, I came across a story about a woman named Hannah in Rabbi Brous's congregation, a woman who noticed a young man laying alone on a bench, clearly in distress. Without hesitation, she bought him lunch and then brought him into her home and helped him get back on his feet. Though everyone in her life worried about her safety, her selfless act changed his life. It wasn't until this woman's last name was mentioned that I realized this was Hannah Mintz, the mother of my childhood friend Marina. I knew just who to reach out to when it came time to invite someone to dedicate this episode.
Hello, I'm Marina Mintz, and I'm honored to dedicate this episode of the Mother's Quest podcast to my late mother, Hannah Mintz. My mom was the absolute best. This is not subjective, it's a fact. Everyone wished Hannah was their mom. A rough childhood that included losing her mother when she was 7 made her determined to do better for her kids, not just Adam and me, but also her students, coworkers, and employees. She was the kindest, most selfless person. She truly believed that if someone needed help and she was able to do that, she was obligated to help them. Many friends and complete strangers benefited from her kindness over the years, and I often got roped into helping her figure out how to do the things she told someone she would do. I have also had the pleasure of calling today's guest my rabbi and friend for over 20 years and got to witness the beautiful later life friendship that our mothers built. I live in Los Angeles and try to live up to the amazing example my mom set for how to navigate the world with kindness and unconditional love. Whether it's for my friends, complete strangers, or the organizations I support with my time and resources, like the Mesothelioma Applied Research Foundation, Alexandria House, and Unfold. In the spirit of my mom, I always try to be a helper.
Thank you, Marina, for this beautiful dedication and for reminding us through your mother's example what it truly means to turn toward one another. Even when we don't know each other well, even when it's hard, even when the world gives us so many reasons to retreat. In this conversation, Rabbi Brous shares about her unexpected path to becoming a rabbi, how her mother's love shaped her, how faith became a foundation for her activism, and why the call to build beloved community starts with the people right around us. We explore the loneliness epidemic, the necessity of joy, and how we can hold multiple truths at once, even in a time of deep polarization. We also speak about the extraordinary power of small acts of courage, like two bereaved fathers that she hosted for an interview at her synagogue, one Israeli and one Palestinian, who found connection and shared grief and chose to build something healing from that pain. Again and again, Rabbi Brous reminds us that even in the face of heartbreak, we are not powerless. She invites us to begin simply by noticing when we want to pull away and choosing instead to turn toward, to offer compassion instead of judgment, to show up even when we don't have the perfect words, and to remember that healing begins not in sweeping solutions, but in small, courageous acts of connection. I hope this episode meets you where you are, acknowledges your pain, and then also, as it did for me, renews a sense of purpose and hope. I'm Julie Neal, and this is Mother's Quest. Rabbi Brous, welcome to the Mother's Quest podcast. You have been such a grounding voice for me in the year that I've discovered you since having your friend Valerie Kaur on the podcast. And as I'm preparing to launch the new season of Mother's Quest this spring, feeling honestly brokenhearted about what's happening in our country and the world, I could not imagine a better person to be able to have share some wisdom and help light our way. So thank you for saying yes to my invitation. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Julie. I'm so grateful to be connected with you and looking forward to the conversation.
The first question I ask every guest is to tell me a little bit about your own childhood and the impact that your mother had in shaping who you are today.
I feel so blessed. I have a really beautiful mother. I just was with her moments ago before jumping on with you. Yeah, I had the cool mom, but she wasn't trying to be cool. She just was. And she was the mom that all my friends trusted with their heartache. And so she was just kind of very young, not in years, but in spirit. And she was just always been kind of the embodiment of love. My folks moved out to LA about 15 years ago, several years into us building this community out here. And I felt like it was the greatest gift that they ever gave us was that they came close in their older years. And even after my father died about a year and a half ago, and just so grateful for these years with them and now with my mom and sort of seeing the different iterations of her throughout her life as she also finds herself and discovers new ways of being in the world. So I feel very, very grateful that I've had such a wonderful mother.
I'm smiling because I mentioned to you that my mom turned 85 not long ago. And so many of the ways that you're describing your mom, I also feel about mine of just like the source of unconditional love, the one that everybody always wanted to be around. And she just exudes beauty, not only on the outside, but on the inside. My father passed away about 3 years ago. So there's a little part of me that's like, maybe we should get our moms together.
Oh, yes. Let's do that.
Let's talk
We'll do
about
a mother-daughter
that after.
thing.
Yes, I love
Yeah.
that. In what ways do you think the way that she mothered you shaped who you are and the path that you're on now?
I think that she raised me to trust and know myself, maybe even somewhat ironically in a way that she wasn't raised to do that with herself. And so, she just grew up in a different era and she wasn't a person who came into the world to sort of spread her wings and soar. She was a little bit more kind of traditional and followed the roles that she thought she was supposed to follow. But by the time my sister and brother and I came along, I think she had a little bit more of a rebellious spirit and wanted to help cultivate that in us and give us permission to figure out who we were called to be in the world. So
Mm.
we have kind of a famous story in our family lore where I had this epiphany the day that I decided to become a rabbi, which was really shocking to me and to my family and to everyone who knew me. And it really came as a calling, and it was quite surprising. I was in Jerusalem when it happened, and I called my parents to tell them. And my mom burst into tears and said, I thought you said you wanted to do something good for the world.
Oh.
And it was so sad and disappointing. And then the reason I mention it is because it's the antithesis of who she was and who she has been since then, because she had this moment of, aren't we raised as girls and women to fill a certain role and not break the mold and essentially get married and support our husbands in their careers? And here I was doing this thing that was completely unscripted. And she was sort of shocked by it, but then immediately by the next day became my biggest supporter. And she and my dad would show up at all my student pulpits and sit in the front row. And, they moved out to Los Angeles ultimately to be part of our community that we built and to support me and to be around to be in the daily lives of our kids. So I know that she was sort of navigating those multiple worlds at once. Like, who is a woman supposed to be? And she was very much a child of the 50s, not the 60s, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
And her mindset shifted through watching my sister and me develop into girls and women in the 90s and sort of find our own voices. And she was so excited by that journey. And in a way, I think, I don't want to say she's sort of living that dream through us, but really with us. She feels very much a part of the dreams that we're dreaming now for ourselves.
Smiling and nodding as I'm listening, just thinking about my mom's own journey and that she grew up in a very different time. I love how your own mom had an immediate reaction and then very quickly was able to shift her thinking, and how she has shown up so fully in the ways that you're describing. It's really beautiful. And that moment that you're talking about when you decided to be a rabbi is in the book. And so I think it's so interesting that the rabbi that you were with at the time also was shocked when you had that revelation and said, "Oh no, I think you want to be a rabbi's wife."
Right. Right.
And you assured him that was not the case. And it's really powerful to see you modeling what a world changing rabbi can look like. I see you embodying what your mom said you were setting out to do. She just didn't see it in the package of a rabbi.
Exactly. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I don't feel called to be a radical. I just feel called to tell the truth and to interpret our tradition honestly and to share it with as much clarity as I can and as much love as I can. And so, that was the case at the time. And even at the time, it came from some ignorance. Like, I didn't really understand. So, what happened for folks who haven't read yet is I was studying in Jerusalem in part because I had this series of humiliating experiences as a Jew, just kind of walking into I'm born and raised as a Jew, but I would walk into Jewish spaces and I realized that I was functionally illiterate. I mean, I did not understand the basic rules and when to turn and where and why are people moving and bowing and shaking. Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's this whole language that comes with observant Jewish life that I didn't understand. I kept embarrassing myself. And so ultimately went to Jerusalem in order to learn. I wanted to develop a basic literacy to understand my own tradition and essentially this tradition that had been passed down for thousands of years that my grandparents had inherited, but then rejected many pieces of in their effort to become really American Jews, not Jewish Americans. So essentially, I was studying in Jerusalem in this outreach weekend run by an Orthodox outreach program. And I had this epiphany. I recognized in this moment that the agents of social change that I admired most in the world were people of faith. They were people who had some faith narrative that was a driving force in their activism that helped them understand that the world could and must look different than it did, and then gave them the spiritual fuel to engage in the kind of fight that they fought for a more just and equitable and loving world. And I realized that I also had a faith narrative that was about a people that had been degraded and denigrated, humiliated for hundreds of years in Egypt, and then went on a journey from narrowness to expansiveness, from darkness to light, from enslavement to liberation. that that was my faith narrative and that I believed in a God who wanted to help people walk toward liberation and redemption. And I just burst into tears and I thought, oh my God, I'm going to be a rabbi. And it had never occurred to me before. And again, it was kind of out of naivete. The rabbis who were around me at that time were very excited that I was so moved by the presentation that they gave. And they were shocked by my words because they certainly weren't trying to convince me to become a rabbi. They wanted me to become religious, not to become a rabbi. And I just thought, if I love Torah and I feel called by God, why would I not take the path that the most serious Jews take in order to help share and translate Torah with people who are in pain? Why would I not become a rabbi? And, it took me years to understand how shocking that moment must have been for them. So,
I want to transition from this story to the larger idea behind Mother's Quest. For me, back in 2016, when I launched the podcast in the community, it was about me stepping in and answering a call where I wanted to feel like I could show up for my kids, both who have unique needs in different ways, but also make a difference beyond my family and continue to grow and learn and to be in community and not isolated. So living an epic life was this tagline, this goal that I set for myself when I said yes to Mother's Quest. Really answering the hero's journey call, which you talk about in some different ways in your book. What would you say if you had to name it in one sentence? You said yes, you answered the call of faith to be a rabbi. And what is it you feel like you've been most on a quest for that you're able to express through this vocation and love of being a rabbi?
it's interesting. I feel since I was a child that I had a sense, which I'm sure came from my mother's love and my father's love, though they weren't political activists really. They were just good people. But I think I had a sense of how broken the world was and how unfair the world was. And when I was in college, I started to put language to it. I started to read Dr. King's sermons and realized that the words I was searching for were beloved community. And I felt this genuine need to try to be part of the struggle to build a beloved community out in the world. And through the building of our community, I realized several years in, we built this community to stand in the intersection of really reinvigorating and reanimating ancient Jewish ritual ideas and Jewish learning and social justice and working to build a more just and loving world. But I realized at some point on this journey that you cannot build the beloved community out in the world if you do not strive to really build the beloved community internally in your home, in your core group, in your community. And we had spent the first maybe decade at IKAR really working on this beautiful, nourishing, experimental experience of holiness in prayer and in communal gathering. And we had worked on activating the community to fight for justice locally and globally. But we hadn't really talked, I hadn't really talked about what it means to be able to turn to one another in love and care. And so I think the answer to your question is the most powerful ancient wisdom that I had inherited as a student of Torah guided me toward this understanding that we are ultimately called to turn to one another with compassion and curiosity, precisely at the moments that we feel most inclined to pull away from each other. And that is the single greatest response to isolation and to loneliness and to a sense of social disconnection, which are plaguing us in our time and leaving us feeling totally powerless to both the social and also the political trends of the moment. But we're not powerless because every one of us has the power and the agency to turn to one another with compassion and with curiosity and care. And that is fundamentally the way that we build the beloved community. It starts really locally. It starts with our immediate, with the people who are around us the most. And that for me has been kind of transformative realization over the last decade plus.
Yeah. And I'm going to link to your book, The Amen Effect, Ancient Wisdom to Mend Our Broken Hearts and World. There's so much in these pages that I've been reading and was also blessed to hear your voice narrating the last few days, really immersed in it. I feel like it is just everything in it is so important for what we're going through right now, where it does feel like we are literally living in different universes where the divisions are so vast and it feels like we're not talking to one another. Sometimes it's hard to keep your heart open, to be honest. I want to use the rest of the time that I have with you to delve into what I call the epic guideposts. So epic is this larger metaphor that we've been talking about what are we really on a quest for? What call are we answering? And you've described your call so beautifully. But then EPIC is also an acronym mnemonic for guideposts that I think can help us to live that kind of a life, especially when we're raising our children. And I'm hoping as I ask you about each of these guideposts, if you could weave in maybe one of the practices from your book that you think can meet the moment and give us something tangible that we could do when we're all feeling a little bit lost right now. I'll guide you through it. The first guidepost, E, stands for engage, and it's about engaging mindfully with our children. If we're following this ultimate goal about helping ourselves and the young people we're raising to learn how to turn toward one another in love and care, what have you learned about how to build that in your own children and maybe also the children in your congregation?
I have 3 kids. They're not little anymore. 16, 18, and 21. I'll tell you, the first thing that comes to mind is speaking with them honestly. I get a lot of questions from people, for example, who are grieving and they want to know how to shield their kids from their grief. And I say to them, don't shield your kids from your grief. Let them know that you're grieving because grieving is a reflection of the depth of the love that you held for the person you lost. And grief teaches our children that people don't just disappear, that when they die, we long for them, we miss them, we yearn for them, and we grieve them. Speaking with them honestly about where the pain is. Now, we don't want to show our kids everything because the kids can't actually hold everything, but we want to be honest with them. And so, I've always done this since they were little. It started for me when we started IKAR when my oldest was 6 months old, and then 9 months old was our official launch. So their whole life, I was running out the door. I'd run home from work to give them dinner and then run out the door to go back to work and teach or go to a board meeting. And one night, I remember when my oldest was 4 years old and I was late and running back out to go to a board meeting. And she grabbed onto my leg and held on tight. And she said, I'm not letting you go. And she was crying and she wanted me to put her to bed. And I said, Eva, I have to go. I have to go. And she said, you don't have to go. You're choosing to go. And I was like, you're right. I am choosing to go. And I want to tell you why. And I said, because, this is what we're talking about in our board meeting tonight. And I think it's really important for them to hear my voice because this is what's at stake. And of course, she was 4, so she couldn't fully understand it. But it set this pattern in motion where I would engage my kids seriously and tell them, this is what I'm struggling with right now. This is what's going on in the community. This is what's going on in the world. And I dream of a world in which you and all children will be safe. And in order to do that, I need to go to this meeting on gun violence tonight because that's my response to what's going on in the world, because I refuse to just give up and leave it to him. So I think your E guidepost of engage is like actually sharing honestly what the challenges are, what the tensions are, and what we're doing about it, which I think has helped them feel more empowered in a time that again conspires to make us feel powerless.
Yeah. And over the years, I've come to learn again and again the power of modeling. Like we all want our children to grow up to be citizens who care and who will choose to show up. And showing up is a theme in your book as well. And when they see us do it, and then what you're underscoring for me, when they understand why we're doing it and we engage thoughtfully with them, I think it really does. It helps to pave the path for them to see themselves doing it
I hope
as
so.
well.
Yes.
And not only as adults, even as young people.
Right. Right.
Okay, this brings us to the next guidepost P, which stands for passionate and purposeful. And this is about the impact that we make beyond our family. In the times that we're in right now, where so many of us are feeling hopeless, where we're doom scrolling and feel like, I don't even know what I can do to make a difference right now, what would be one particular practice or perspective that you think could help us to make a positive difference?
Well, I want to say here that at the end of the book, I put a series of practices, one for each chapter, for exactly the reason that you're saying and what we've been talking about throughout this conversation, that we might be tempted to feel so powerless right now. It's so overwhelming. And just the magnitude of what is transpiring before us, and the level of catastrophe that we're dancing around right now,
Mhm.
if we're clear eyed about it, is quite terrifying. So I wanted not just for people to feel good reading the book, but to actually feel like there are ways to transform this into daily practice. So, as you said, the book points us to the power of showing up and why it matters when we step closer to people who are especially experiencing pain and loss, the bereaved, the bereft, the ill. And so, practice number one in the book is just show up, just go to the funeral, just go to the Shiva, go to the house of mourning. So, we are pulling away from each other right now, and we're pulling away from each other's pain. We feel like pain is contagious. And so there's a kind of subtle subconscious messaging to all of us saying, if you get too close to that person's suffering, you'll become vulnerable to that suffering yourself. But actually, we're already vulnerable to that suffering. And what we end up doing by not stepping closer is actually endangering one another because we are dialogical beings. We need one another. I think the first and most practical practice is just show up. When you don't know what to do, just pick up the phone and call a person who's struggling or who's not well and check in on them. Just go to their house and bring them a lasagna. And the idea is this doesn't fix everything. We're not going to heal each other. We're not going to fix each other, but our presence will help one another navigate the deepest darkness. And if we do that, if we make a kind of passionate commitment to that work, that I believe becomes part of our purpose in the world is really to be present and escort one another through these most challenging times.
And as I'm hearing you say this, I'm also thinking about there are so many communities that are, feels like, really being attacked and resources pulled, things said about them to dehumanize them. It's also hard to know where to show up. And so I'm thinking about the importance of creating enough space to just get clear about like one issue that really matters and begin by showing up there.
I think that's really right. And I mean, I learned this first many years ago from Nick Kristof and Cheryl Wudunn in their book, Half the Sky, where they talk about the danger of illiteracy in the developing world and how, especially for girls and women, illiteracy can basically be a death sentence. And they said, once you understand how dangerous it is to grow up in this kind of environment with that, the level of vulnerability that these girls experience, you might just be completely overwhelmed and feel like, so I can't do anything for anyone because there's just too much pain. But they say pick one corner of the world and just start working toward healing. Just pour your love into one tiny corner of the world. I read the book 15, 18 years ago, and I constantly think about that. When you feel overwhelmed, do something. Bring a lasagna, go to the funeral, just show up. And that not only helps the person you show up for, but it helps remind you that you actually are alive and you have the power of touching people and being touched by people, even in this difficult time.
Yeah. That brings us to the next guidepost I, which stands for invested in yourself. And this is the guidepost that is about refilling our own cup so that we can show up for our kids and for other people, connecting to the things that bring us joy, staying in a place of growth and learning. Wondering what practice comes to mind for you when you think about this guidepost.
All right, I'll give you two for this one.
Okay.
The first is Shabbat. Just observing Shabbat has been, for me, the greatest gift to my soul. No matter what is going on in the world, and no matter what's going on in my work life, in the community, when the sun goes down on Friday night, I'm offline. and the phone is away. My husband and my kids and I are having Shabbat. And that means we're sitting at the table, we're eating the best food of the week, we're singing together, we're having friends in the house, we're taking a nap on Shabbat afternoon. Like we have 25 hours that's about reigniting the dream of what the world could look like.
Mhm.
And that happens every single week for the last several thousand years, no matter how bad things were outside. And as bad as things are now, they were worse, in throughout Jewish history than they even are now. And this is the response that our tradition offers, which is for a moment, step out of the world as it is and step into the world as it could be so that we reclaim our point of access to that dream. And that for me has been incredibly meaningful and powerful. The other is a practice that I actually write about in the book, taking a joy break, because you mentioned joy. So I feel like I want to lift this one up in particular. So my beautiful friend, Shifra, had fell in love with the most wonderful man, and they were going to spend their life together. Shortly after they fell in love, he was diagnosed with a fatal cancer. And so they ended up spending the last 9 months of his life navigating the illness and the treatments and ultimately walking him to his death. We buried him, and she was deeply, deeply grieving. And she called me a couple weeks after he died, and she said, it just doesn't feel right to put on the widow's garb and dress in sackcloth and ashes and just cry all day, every day for him, because the reason I fell in love with him was because of his vitality, because he was so alive in this world and he was the life of the party and he was laughing all the time and he told the funniest stories and he was always with friends and with wine. And so she said, I want to honor him not only by crying, but also by laughing and also by experiencing joy. And so she literally, this was a couple weeks after her beloved died, she would set her alarm on her phone for 18 minutes a day. And she said, I am going to experience joy for 18 minutes a day if it's the last thing I do. And she would force herself in those 18 minutes to do something that would give her joy, whether it's eat a chocolate cake or go for a walk in Central Park or just blast music and dance alone in her apartment. And she did it every single day for her year of mourning and journaled about it. She wrote down every day what she did. And at the end of the year, she had this journal of her 18 minutes of joy. I took it on in solidarity with her. I said, if she can do this, like I am going to force myself at least 18 minutes of joy every day too, no matter what is going on, no matter who's in the White House, no matter how brokenhearted I am. For 18 minutes, I am going to go for a walk with my husband around the block and hold his hand. I'm going to eat the mint chocolate chip, dairy free ice cream, whatever. Like whatever the thing is, that actually does give me joy. And so I take a joy break. That's one of my practices in the book, and just designate an amount of time every single day where we can just be full of joy, because that's not escapism. That's actually engaging in joy as a spiritual necessity and finding the fuel that we need in order to live most fully.
I'm so glad that you said that, because there's been a lot shared recently about the power of rest and
Yes.
the power of joy.
Yes.
And sometimes that doesn't feel like a luxury that I should be leaning into.
I'll say it again. Joy is not a luxury. It is a spiritual necessity. We need joy. We need to experience joy. I was just speaking earlier this morning with bereaved parents who've suffered a horrible, horrible loss. And they were talking about how they went away with friends. And there were a couple of days where they were with their oldest and dearest friends. They just had a good time for the first time in many, many months since this loss. But they felt so guilty, because how can we have a good time and how can we experience joy when we've just experienced this loss? And I was saying to them, you're not putting your grief away. The joy break is what actually is a manifestation of your grief, and it allows you to grieve fully. Because as a human being, the joy is also a part of your heart. We are complex beings, we're holding all of it. And so I really feel we have to shift the way that we think about joy. We can't feel guilty when we experience laughter. We are celebrating the holiday of Purim in the Jewish calendar. And the story is that the Jewish people were marked for annihilation by a Jew hater. It sort of points to the vulnerability of Jews in the diaspora, this kind of ever present vulnerability. And The Jews were marked for annihilation and then miraculously survived. And what do? They make a feast and they celebrate with joy and they send little gifts of love to their friends and they take care of the poor. And the idea is you have no idea what tomorrow's going to bring. Life can turn upside down in an instant. So make a feast with your friends and eat well and share love with people around you and make a more just society. And that's our deepest response to the instability of the world. I mean, the problem is if you only do that, if you're off balance, you're like, you become a hedonist because I lived in New York City during 9/11 and I was a rabbi already. I was a young rabbi. And that day, everyone was streaming uptown and I started walking downtown because I thought, oh my God, I have to go see where the pain is and, like meet up with the other clergy so that we can help. And it was so terrifying. I mean, there are no words to describe New York City that day and that whole period. But that night, late that night, I went back up to my apartment, 100s. I was back uptown and there was a little bar on my corner and it was packed with people and they were just piss drunk. I mean, it was a whole eat drunk, be merry thing. And I thought, oh my God, like people have lost their ability to connect with what's actually going on. They want to lose it, they want to escape it. This is different. This isn't about escapism. This is about experiencing a joy that's deeply rooted in the reality of our vulnerability and the danger of the moment. And at the same time, aware of the fact that human beings need joy to be an expression of our deepest humanity. And that the only way we can actually be of service in the world is when we also honor that we are human beings who need rest and who need joy and who need to eat well with our loved ones and need to sing and dance. That's part of the most ancient human call. And that's why in all of the Psalms, they're 3,000 years old. It's Shiru Ladonai Shir Chadash, sing to God a new song. That's how we end every week is by singing these Psalms that are about the power of song, even in really terrible times. And I think that's a really important lesson for us in this moment.
Thank you for all of this. I'm noticing we spent a little bit more time on this. I invested in ourselves and it feels necessary. The last guidepost C stands for connected to a strong support network. So we realize we do not have to be alone on the journey. And I want to ask you specifically on this one about how to build solidarity across differences. And I'm also thinking about the reality of what we've been experiencing with what's happening in Gaza and in Israel. This is something that you speak honestly about. What wisdom do you have, or what practices do you have for us to hold the humanity of one another, even in the midst of the horrors that are unfolding?
Right. Well, the whole paradigm of the book is rooted around this ancient ritual that took place thousands of years ago. We don't have to go into it here at the end of our conversation, but the essence of the ritual is the reminder that it is precisely when we are most repelled from each other, are most inclined to pull away and to retreat, that we have to turn toward one another. And that's not only from others who are in pain and suffering, but also from people who've hurt us and from people whose ideas or behavior actually harms us. And what we're called to do is see each other's humanity precisely in the moment that it's hardest to see. And I have just been holding that at the forefront of my heart for the last 17, 18 months. I wrote the book, I closed the manuscript before October 7th and this horrific war. But I realized the book came out once the war was several months in. And I realized that this was exactly the Torah, the message that I needed to share most, which is we don't want to have anything to do with each other right now. We are so anguished. We are so hurt. And we're all feeling vulnerable. And when we feel traumatized and when we're grieving and when we're full of fear, we're not our most generous and empathic selves. And yet we have to keep turning back to each other's humanity. And it's precisely by awakening to one another's humanity that we awaken to our own. Humanity is not a zero-sum game. So when I honor and recognize the pain of my Jewish family, that does not diminish my heartache over the pain and loss in the Palestinian community. And when I honor the pain and loss in the Palestinian community, that in no way challenges or diminishes my connection to or my grief for my own Jewish and Israeli family. And I think part of the terrible loss of this time is that too many people feel like they have to choose sides. The sides they're choosing between are you're either pro Palestine or you're pro Israel. And that is just idiotic, frankly. I mean, what you either are is you're either pro war, pro extremism, pro endless death, or you're pro humanity and pro peace. And I think we have to get clear about that. And that's why I spend my time really engaging, amplifying, platforming, trying to help resource the people who've lost the most and who are the most committed to building a just and peaceful future for Israelis and Palestinians. And what they're saying, and I'm talking about the Bereaved Families Forum, also called the Parent Circle. I know you had some of them on your show. I'm talking about the peace builders in the street, Israelis and Palestinians who are siblings to each other. And they're saying we have to build a better future because the reality that they see is that there are 7 million Jews and about 7 million Palestinians living in that land, and nobody's leaving. Little newsflash, the world doesn't want the Jews and it doesn't want the Palestinians either. And so they're all staying. What can they do to build a just and peaceful future together? And what they keep saying, every one of them says, there's enough war, there's enough suffering, there's enough heartache. We as a diaspora communities, we must not import the extremism, the cruelty, the violence of the rhetoric of that land into the diaspora because it's actually making things worse for the people on the ground. And our job instead is to constantly go back to reclaiming one another's humanity and our own. The way we do that is paying attention to when we feel like pulling away. And instead of pulling away, turning toward each other. And as I argue in the book, turning toward one another with compassion and with curiosity. So the practice, because I know you want to get practical about it, like how do we actually do that? Is try to stay at the table. Try to stay at the table with the person who's making you crazy and who you feel like, I can't even be in the room with you. And try to get curious about who they are. Because what I have found, not every time, but many times, is that when we shift from a mindset of defensiveness and rage to a mindset of curiosity, we actually open something up in our own hearts and also in one another's hearts. We help them become more human to us and to themselves. And that's a really hard practice. And I try to do it as much as possible. I think it's really essential to the times that we're living through.
Yeah. As resources in the show notes, I want to link to a conversation that I was listening on. I now discovered you have an IKAR podcast. So I was able to listen to this, the conversation between an Israeli man and a Palestinian man who also had done a TED Talk. You hosted them recently.
Yes.
I would love for people to listen to that conversation. And I'm also noticing that the American Friends of the Parent Circle and the American Friends of the Combatants for Peace, those two organizations have this joint Memorial Day ceremony.
Yes.
And that's coming up on April 29th. I think both of those would be really good places for people to hold the humanity of Palestinians and Israelis and try to come to listen with curiosity.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for lifting up both of those things. This conversation was with Maoz Inon and Aziz Abu Sara. And Julie, I just want to give you one moment of framing for this because I think it will be really important for the listeners. But Maoz is a Jewish Israeli. Both of his parents were murdered on October 7th by Hamas. And he describes that he was drowning in a sea of sorrow and rage. And about 3 days later, he got a message on Facebook from Aziz Abu Sara, a Palestinian whom he had met once before, who reached out to him in this moment of absolute crisis and said, Maoz, I don't know if you remember me, but I read what happened to your parents. I am so, so sorry. I'm devastated to hear about their death. And Maoz responded saying, Aziz, I'm so touched that you've reached out. And I am not only devastated by their death, but I'm so worried for all of the innocent Palestinians that are going to die now as a result of this war that's been brought upon us. Both of them expressing so much humanity. And it was transformational for both of them. And now they've been traveling around the world together. As you said, they did a TED talk together. But Maoz says, I lost my parents and I gained a brother. And Aziz is also bereaved. His older brother, his hero, who was 19 when he was 10, died from injuries sustained in an Israeli prison. And he spent many years wanting revenge and then realized that the best revenge was peace. Like, no more people should die like this. And so the two of them are really at the helm of a kind of new iteration of the peace movement right now. And I feel for all of those really good-hearted Americans who are saying, what can we do? We're so devastated by war and violence and all of this. Instead of fueling the violence by picking sides, we need to support and amplify the people on the ground who are actually working toward a better future for everyone.
Yeah. I'm just noticing how emotional I'm hearing you share even more of the details of that story and how their story really picks up on the threads of everything we've been talking about as our conversation is coming to an end, about showing up, about being compassionate, about not turning away, about choosing one thing you think you could do. I'm grateful for their example. So their story, I think, really weaves together all the themes that we've been talking about and that are in your beautiful book. We are at the end of our time together. This is a moment where you have an opportunity to invite me and anyone listening to take on one challenge or respond to an invitation. I realize that you've had practices in each of the guideposts, so we already have some things to do, but is there one overarching invitation that you would have for us?
I'll give you one because I want to try not to be vague. I mean, the vague instruction is turn to one another with compassion and curiosity. That's it. Just that when you feel yourself pulling away, instead turn toward. But I'll give you one very tachlis, practical way that I've been trying to do this. And this is related to all of the literature around the loneliness epidemic and the way that we feel so alienated from one another today. I read a study in 2019 before COVID that said that 1 in 3 Americans do not know the names of their next door neighbors, and that nearly a third of Americans say that they have not one confidant in the world. We're just in deep, deep isolation from one another. So here's the practice. I started in response to that study to go on daily runs in my neighborhood and just to run around the block. I run just 1.5 miles. It's just a little tiny run. And I say hello to everyone. And I do it every single day. And now I know my neighbors. And I think what we can do is run, walk, bike, slowly go around your neighborhood and check in on your neighbors and just say hi and introduce yourself if you don't know each other. And what you find is that you start to learn each other and you start to say, like, oh, hey, how did your mother's surgery go? And how are you recovering? And did you notice this? And did you see that? And it changed my relationship with my own neighborhood. And it changed my whole sense of time. Like I'm working crazy hours. I never thought I had time to do that. I made time for it because it felt like it was important to embody this kind of curiosity. And it actually changed my whole mindset. The small is start to practice this in your own neighborhood. And the big picture is not just for your neighbors and your friends and your colleagues, but for in general, start to try to build a mindset where we notice in ourselves when we're tempted to pull away and instead we turn toward with compassion, with curiosity, and with care. And I think that that not only will change us as individuals, but will change us as a collective.
So beautiful. Well, thank you again for this time. So we close with acknowledgments. We will do it short and succinctly. I want to acknowledge you for this message about turning toward. I feel like it wove through every single thing, turning toward our kids with honesty and bringing them into the conversation about what matters to us, turning towards our purpose and one small step, one thing that we can do to make a difference, turning towards rest and joy and a spaciousness inside ourselves so that we can continue to show up, and then turning towards our community and especially those who maybe we have differences with, and doing that with compassion and with curiosity. So thank you for the gift of that overarching message and the way that I could see it showing up in all of these elements of my life.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you so much. And you're always welcome at IKAR. I hope we'll get to connect in person soon.
Thank you so much for coming along with me on this episode of the Mother's Quest podcast. I hope this conversation sparked something that will help you live your epic life. If you'd like to get show notes and learn more about how to join the Mother's Quest community, visit mothersquest.com. And while you're there, I would love it if you would follow the prompts to subscribe, leave a review on Apple Podcasts, and help us to spread the word. I want to end with some words to help light the way on your quest. Seize the day, love your people, honor your gifts. Until next time.